Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another fun-filled edition of Adam's Music Box, where today I want to wish a very happy birthday to Steve Walsh, keyboard player and vocalist of Kansas. Now, I've talked about Kansas before. I've called them the greatest American prog rock band, but since it's Steve's birthday, let's take some time to talk about them again. Kansas were one of those unique bands that came out of nowhere to create memories out of nowhere. See what I did there? They really came into the world with a bang. Their debut album was absolutely sensational. It came out in 1974 and it announced what the Kansas style was. It was deeply sophisticated rock music, progressive rock music that borrowed from European classical traditions, American funk and soul traditions, American folk and bluegrass traditions. It borrowed from a bit of everything, and much of it was all hidden within the arrangements and even the instrumentations. Because to listen to Kansas with the naked ear, you're just going to hear really energetic, incredibly virtuosic rock and roll. But on careful listening to how the music was arranged and what solos were inserted where and what sounds were hitting you where, you really realize that they sucked up all of these influences, maybe unconsciously, but every single member of that classic lineup was absolutely virtuosic. Let's shout them all out. There was Steve Walsh on vocals and keyboards, Kerry Lefgren, who was a guitar player, backing vocals, sometimes additional keyboards, one of the lead writers of the band, along with Steve. I think Kerry wrote even a bit more. There was Rich Williams, another guitar player who backed up Kerry. So you got a two guitar player band. So you've got a really loud, heavy sound, but not so heavy that it was overwhelming. No one was stepping on anyone's toes. And that was another thing that made them so special. Lots of separation in the sounds so that you were hearing all these sounds at once with interplay rather than, overlap. Of course, David Hope on bass, Phil Ehart on drums, wonderful drummer who was with the band in all of its incarnations. And of course, on violin and vocals, the wonderful, almost the mascot of the band, if you will, Robbie Steinhardt. Wonderful guy, wonderful violin player. And that added such a unique sound and flavor to the band at all times, both on their louder, rocky numbers and even on some of the quieter numbers that they did at one point. But Steve Walsh is in many ways the face of the band insofar as he provided lead vocal on almost all of the tracks, and his persona on stage, how he would dance around the keyboards, how he would sort of do the ballet on the Hammond organ, often covered in sweat. It was really a sight to see, but the theatrics were really motivated by passion because Kansas weren't a showy band in the sense that they wore costumes or had big stage effects. No, these were regular guys from a regular part of the world, rural Kansas, and they were humble. They were really nice people. That comes through on all of the interviews. And they just said, right, we're here to play and we're going to play our asses off and we're going to make the audience happy. One of the interesting things about a Kansas show is if you weren't a Kansas fan before you went to a Kansas show, you would be a Kansas fan once you left. The music was sort of hard to deny, and they played with such a power and intensity that you had to love it. And although their first album sold relatively well, this was obviously the self-titled debut, then the aptly named Song for America, followed by Mosque. Wonderful album, some of the best prog albums of all time. They stuck with the formula, and in persisting, they did strike gold in 76 with their most well known album, Left Overture. Again, every song really could have been a potential hit, but the hit that opens up the album, Carry On Wayward Son, is probably the song that they're remembered by most. It's been immortalized everywhere. South Park actually made a really interesting comment on it. It's the favorite song of the boys to play in the game Guitar Hero. And then Stan, for those who don't know South Park, one of the boys around whom the show revolves, his father, Randy, actually can play guitar. And he's of the age of the guys in Kansas when they were young. And so he takes out his Les Paul and puts it into a Fender amp and starts playing Carry On Wayward Son for the boys, who aren't very impressed because they'd rather play the fake guitar of the video game controllers than maybe learn a real good instrument from their father. I found that to be very interesting, and it shows just how deeply that song has permeated into the wider pop culture. Of course, on the following album, Point of No Return, one of the best rock ballads of all time, The Mournful Dust in the Wind. Absolutely beautiful there. So Kansas not only had class, but they had range. They really ought to be put up there when people are talking about prog rock gods and all of that other stuff that the magazines have been saying in recent years. Put Kansas on there. England is, of course, the traditional birthplace of prog. Canada has bands like Rush and Triumph and Max Webster. And there are American prog bands, some very good ones, which we'll talk about later on this show. But my favorite of all the American prog bands is Kansas, and they're well overdue for more love because while they were popular, they really deserve even more. Happy birthday, Steve Walsh, and let every member of Kansas, past, present, and future, rock on. Like and subscribe. We'll see you next time. Take care.